Okay, on this episode of the John 1911 podcast, episode 326, unfortunately, we had a lot of technical issues. And what was originally recorded as a hour and 40-minute podcast with all three of us has now I've been able to save, I've been able to save two of us. Unfortunately, we have lost Danny. So I had to edit some of the audio, and I've been able to save two basic conversations during this podcast. Kraken and I discussed the AN-94 hyperburst Russian rifle that has made an appearance in the United States, and we share some of our stories about Gaston Glock. So it's going to be a short episode, unfortunately, and I'm going to try to figure out what these problems are before we do the end of year Q&A. So please enjoy this truncated episode of the John 1911 podcast. Did well, Kraken. Talk to me about Russian rifles.
Oh my God, where do you start with this one? AN-94, there's two known to be in the United States. One's in civilian hands, and the government has possession of the other, which I'm not exactly sure what that means. But it's got some real interesting features. It's got a hyperburst mode where, and I got to back up a little bit. So it has a reciprocating barrel. So when the first shot's fired, the barrel actually recoils into the receiver and then rebounds back out.
It's a long action. It's kind of a long action, like an A5 Browning shotgun.
Exactly.
Well,
But
the barrel anyway.
the barrel is, yeah. But in that process in there, somehow they get a round stripped off the magazine, and it sits basically on a carrier, and it's loaded into the chamber and fired before the barrel is fully locked in the out position again. So it's hyperburst. So basically, if you put it in hyperburst mode, you get two shots that are so fast that it sounds like one.
It sounds like one. And 5.45 Russian.
5.45 by 39.
Yeah.
Yep.
This gun looks like an AK-47 kind of. Yeah, it's an AK
Yep.
gun.
But that barrel probably moves a good 3-4 inches.
I'd have to look at the video. I mean, I
it's
doubt it
very
moves
noticeable.
4. Is it? But it moves proportionally. It moves as much as an M2 Browning machine gun barrel moves.
Oh yeah. Well, it's not a big recoiling round to start with. The really interesting part was up close in hyperburst mode, the 2-round hyperburst mode. At close quarters distance, the rounds hit very close together, like within an inch.
Yeah.
They started moving back, and at 100 yards, you could keep them
hold
on
on
a silhouette.
for the benefit of the listener and for Danny. Who's they?
Oh, Garand Thumb,
a YouTuber, has popped up with
yeah,
one of these guns. He borrowed it.
yeah. So as they started moving back, of course, the group started to open up. At 100 yards, you could keep the first one was usually centered up pretty good, and then the other one was a flyer, but still stayed on a target. At 200, it kind of fell apart. You could generally get one on target, and one was completely off the target. I would think it would be more to do with the barrel harmonics of the barrel still moving as the second shot is fired.
Yeah, I would just chalk that up to like fully automatic dispersion.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is this gun shoots. Well, does it, and Kraken, tell me if I'm misremembering the video, because I just watched it one time with my mouth open, not really paying attention to the details. So it's got semi-automatic, hyperburst, and hyperburst is a 2-shot action, and then it's got full auto. Is that correct?
Sort of. When you go to full auto, it starts with the 2-shot hyperburst, And then there's a really, really short, slight delay, and then it goes into what we would consider full auto.
Yeah, I remember that. But do you remember the bill drills that they were shooting?
Oh
to
God, under a second.
A bill drill, Danny, a bill drill is typically 6 shots. One with a handgun. It's 6 shots. I do it from a draw. 6 shots in like a zone on a target at seven. I think it's 7 yards. I think some people shoot at six, but I believe it's technically 7 yards. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this thing, it can do, because it shoots the 2 shots so quickly. You're literally, it's like three pulls of the trigger gets you 6 shots. And these guys were getting bill drill hits again with a rifle. I mean, they were under a second, right? Isn't that what you said?
I think the best time was 0.89.
It's like, oh my God.
And you could cover the group. It was maybe oh, I don't know. After about 3 rounds, there was you could probably cover the group with a roll of masking tape.
Yeah, it was like, it wasn't all over the paper. It was like definitely cover with your fist easily.
Yeah,
And and so the thing is, this gun, what makes it interesting is the Russians. You got one thing. You look, we can all kind of cap on the Russians a little bit. I've been known to do it. Um, but one thing the Russians have always kind of been able to, at least traditionally, been able to do, is they do have some really smart people in Russia, and they come up with some stuff. And they may not, their execution may not be as good as it could be, but they sometimes, invent things. For example, this is going to come as a shock to everybody. So, Ronald Reagan, we had the F-117 stealth fighter, the fighter bomber that we developed in the 70s, and we had it in the 80s to fight the Russians, the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, or Western in West Europe. To go, because the F-1's the stealth bomb. It was the super secret stealth fighter, and it didn't even get released publicly until practically the 90s. Really, no one really saw this thing until 1991, until the Gulf War. It was a totally, totally secret program. Well, the Russians were aware of it, and it had, there were a lot of different iterations of what they thought it looked like. But here's the funny thing about the stealth fighter and stealth technology: the Russians, the Soviet Union, technically invented stealth technology. What happened was, well, no, we didn't even steal it. What happened was a Soviet scientist wrote a paper on I'm probably gonna use the wrong word, the refraction and reflection and absorption of radar signals, on material and at angles. And he wrote a paper just kind of describing it theoretically and published it. The Americans saw the paper, and the scientists were like, I wonder if we could do something with that. And they used that paper as the basis for inventing the F-117 stealth fighter, which the original stealth fighter was called the Have Blue program. And that technology was developed specifically from a Soviet scientist theoretical paper that they published. It wasn't like a top secret thing, like it was an academic paper. Like, the Russians can come up with some shit, and this gun is super interesting, but it's so complicated. They invented the Russians developed this gun with the idea of possibly fielding it with all of their military. But number one, I guess it's too expensive, and number two, it's so complicated. It probably would never actually stand to be adopted by general use, because it would probably get too fouled up. Like, it literally has a cable and a pulley system in it, right, Kraken?
I'll tell you what. I saw that, and I had flashbacks to trying to get my garage door fixed. Because that's literally, it looks like a miniature garage door pulley system with a little cable on it and a 180-degree pulley, and it reciprocates back and forth on a cable.
Yeah, it's just yeah. The reality is the Thompson is the Thompson is a commercially successful machine gun 45 caliber, but from a real world standpoint, Thompson does kind of suck a little bit. Like, I mean, it's so the people pick up the a Tommy gun, they're like, "Holy shit, this thing's heavy!" Like, it is so heavy. Like, it's just not. It's not as it. Look, I'm not saying it's a terrible gun. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, a lot of people have an opinion of a Tommy gun that comes from movies, not from real life and actual application. Like a lot of people have the same opinion about how like RPGs work, like RPG rockets, RPG sevens, like just everything about them that you see on TV isn't true. Like the first thing, if you've ever actually carried a real RPG seven, they're fucking heavy. Just the tubes, like they're heavy as shit. I mean they are. I mean it's like carrying a lead pipe around, and then you got to carry the rockets, and then the idea like the rocket, it's just like it doesn't they just they're here and they're there. They're gone. Like they just the way they work and the way people think that they're not like you just can't pick up an RPG 7 and just be running around with it like you can with a rifle. It's like carrying a pretty heavy machine gun around. They're just heavy. Like, but in Hollywood if you're carrying a rubber one, it looks cool. Like, guys are running around and commander rolling and doing all this stuff. The Tommy gun's kind of the same way. The Tommy gun is not the amount of weight that you have to deal with that gun to try, and your limited range with 45 ACP. It's not a very practical gun at all. It really isn't. I'd maybe probably take. I mean, if I had to have the caliber, I don't know. I mean, Kraken, would you disagree? Would a grease gun be better than a Tommy gun? Like for
From a weight standpoint, it's going to be a lot more portable. Uh, so yeah, I'd probably take a grease gun over a Thompson because they are
hmm
heavy.
and
On the
and
flip side, the Thompson does eat up recoil pretty decent because of the weight, but if you got to
yeah,
hump that thing very far at all, you're going to have long monkey arms by the end of the day.
yeah. Well, I mean, they mass produced, they mass produced Tommy guns too. But like, they've even simplified. If you look at the early Tommy guns versus the later ones, I think was it the early one, the 1928? Is that right? Do I have that right? The 28 is that the early one, or is the 28 a middle one? And
I
then there's because like the Tommy guns like at one point they got rid of all the fins, the heat sink on the fins,
yeah,
and like the Tommy guns that you see in World War II, like the GI Tommy gun, is a lot is not as it has less machining on it to make it than the original Tommy gun because it was the original Tommy gun's more like a I'm not gonna say Rolex watch, but the amount of machining to machine a lot of that stuff is just off. It's off the charts compared to just making a smooth barrel and stuff. So anyway, we're kind of
yeah.
going off on a tangent. So to get back to the AN-94, and what caught my attention in the AN-94 and why I've been talking to Kraken about it is I don't know this for certain. I wouldn't be in a position to know it. I don't know. I don't, I haven't talked to anybody and I wouldn't really be in a position to talk to anybody. But one of the rumors that we have heard was that Larry Vickers was trying to he got in trouble for probably bringing a FAMAS into the U.S., a fully automatic FAMAS um, as a dealer demo, as a LE demo gun to import it, which is, they really had no intention of actually trying to get law enforcement sales with it. And apparently, if I understand it correctly, he was talking to his contacts in Russia because these guns are extremely rare. There's only been maybe 1,000 of them made ever, and like, there's not, there's probably not 100 of them or 200 of them floating around. I mean, they're just not, they don't exist in the United States. But apparently, he had secured one. If I heard it right, he had secured one in Russia Like they're like, yeah, Larry, this is yours. He's like, yeah, it's mine. And like he had planned on bringing it in later under some kind of thing. And that was part of he got jammed up on that because it was considered compensation or considered doing business with the Russians. And that was part of the one of the problems because you're not allowed to engage in any kind of financial beneficial transactions or trade with the Russia with the embargoes because of the Ukraine war. And that specific this gun that we're talking about that showed up on Garand Thumb's channel, that model of gun is, I think, what really probably did Larry in. I mean, it could have done, it really, could have done him in. It's just interesting. It's like, but then the question is, how the hell whoever Garand Thumb got that gun from, how they get the gun?
Exactly. And what I want to know is when they made the comment, the only other one in America is in government possession, and that's all they said on it. So, did did somebody from Delta snatch it off a battlefield somewhere, or
No,
uh, did
no,
Ivan
no.
the arms dealer, sell one out the back of a truck door?
Okay, so okay, here's how this really works. So people like they want to talk about the CIA and battlefield pickups and all this. It's like, well, it's not really that sexy. There is an organization in the U.S. government whose job is to acquire um, foreign military technology, and it's called there. You've all heard of the CIA. And then there's a group called the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And you may all here's going to ring up. Here's a blast from the past, Danny. Do you remember General Michael Flynn? Yeah,
Yeah.
he's Trump's favorite general, and then he got all jammed up. Flynn retired as I think a 3-star. I don't know if it's a 4-star, but I think it's a 3-star billet. Is the chief of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and they're the ones that go out and like they're always trying to do things like if there's a new gun on a tank or there's a new round or if someone shows up with something they'll scoop it up. But apparently these AN-94s were sold commercially because they didn't get any military sales. And so, they were made for a number of years and they were sold commercially, around the world. And they somehow picked them up that way. Well, I mean, Ian McCollum has done a video on one when he was in France. The French government absolutely has one because that's
Yeah.
where Ian McCollum did a video on it. And they picked it up, they picked it up the same way. I mean, I don't know how it works in England or United Kingdom, but like the Royal Armories over there, I mean, it might, as an organization, they may very well be the group that goes around and goes, hey, they like to have reference guns and they scoop stuff up and they're like, hey, we hear there's some new Russian gun out there. We're going to try to get one. Because the Royal Armories exist not just as a museum, but it's actually a pattern and reference collection for the United Kingdom government. So if they want to do things or see things or test things that they want access to particular pieces of equipment, they go to the Royal Armories and go, Lord Johnson, give me the AN-94. And now they pull it and they go, here you go, sir. So it's
Yeah.
not all like spies and whatever. They just go out and buy the shit,
Yeah.
or
Well, I didn't know it was being sold commercially, so if they were selling them commercially, it probably wasn't hard to grab hold of a couple here and there. So
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's like, but the joke was, I don't know, like we were watching that video. It's like, is that Larry Vickers' gun? It's like, is that the one Larry Vickers? It's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Is Garand Thumb going to go down next? I shouldn't make fun of it, and I don't mean it like that. I really, I do. I'm going to say this because I do hope that there's some way forward that Larry Vickers can find a way to, you know, be back in the game. I don't know how that's supposed to happen, but it just Larry Vickers going down and not ever being able to own guns again, much less like you going to jail. But like it's just like like a sad story, almost like a Shoeless Joe Jackson, or like the whole like the Pete Rose thing. Like it's just like really, it's so heartbreaking in a way, and so terribly ironic. I just you know
Yeah.
I hope Larry has a well. Yeah, I mean he's a famous member of Delta Force. I mean I don't know how that works, but I mean I don't think he was super famous when he was in Delta, but I mean I don't know how that's. I mean his. I don't know how that works. We just have. Oh, he no, he no. I mean no. I mean no. Actually, no. He no. I mean no. Larry Vickers was the biggest. Oh yeah, or you just making a joke because they had a falling out. I think we don't know. Yeah, okay. Man, apparently doesn't shoot well. Dude, I am so like cement and Amish blind right now. I barely have two brain cells to rub together. You know, uh, you know. So, well, also speaking on gun content, I guess we need to go ahead and at least mention this. Man, Gaston Glock passed away. 94.
94.
I don't know 100%. Um, what I do know is it is based in Austria. They have various like Glock. They sell and make Glocks in Russia. Last I checked, I think they make them in Brazil. Isn't there a factory in Brazil? They make them in Smyrna, Georgia. They make them in Austria. Um, I don't think I think those are all the Glock plants. Um, I know that when he got a divorce from his first wife, that it got real ugly. Like about like because I think he owned the company Lock, Stock, and Barrel, or at least controlling interest in the company, and she tried to claim that he was doing something to basically keep her from her half. I believe that that all got settled, and then he had hired at one point he had hired somebody to kind of run his affairs. He'd hired I don't know, like a money man, not a money man, like a the only I don't know this specifically, and I'm going to use a term a lot of people are probably not familiar with. The only thing I can assume is he probably created like a family office, and so like I don't know this specifically, but a family office is like if you're super wealthy, you don't go to Merrill Lynch and hire a stockbroker and investment guy because you're paying them all those fees and you're looking for write-offs. You might as well just create your own investment house. And that investment house has one client, and it's you and your family and your son and your daughter and your in-laws and your dog and your you know what I mean? And it's called a family office. A lot of very wealthy families have family offices, in case most people are familiar with that. And somehow there was a guy who was trying to take over control of Glock, I think. And he hired a hitman to assassinate Gaston Glock when he was in his 60s. I think this was in France. And what they wanted to do. Danny? Have you heard this story? Kraken,
No,
Kraken.
I
Have you
have
heard
not
this
heard
story?
this. No.
So okay, and if I didn't know it was going to be a quiz, I would have studied. So what they did is they hired this hitman. I think was a former wrestler, like a WWE type wrestler. I'm not sure whatever that would be in Europe. And they were like, okay, he needs to die so we can execute maybe certain paperwork so we can take control of the company, but it can't be murdered. So they came up with this idea that they were going to, since he was an older gentleman in his late 60s, which to me isn't that old, but okay. They got a rubber mallet and I think they attacked him in a parking garage, and they were gonna beat him in the head with a rubber mallet until he expired. But they were hoping the rubber mallet would not leave wounds. So when the medical examiner, like these guys are real geniuses, the medical examiner was like, "Oh, Gaston, he passed out and hit his head and hit the cement and like there's no obvious sign." Their plan was they thought they could get away beating him to death with a rubber mallet and they wouldn't be able to tell that they beat him to death. So this wrestler shows up, starts beating Gaston Glock in the head. Gaston Glock starts fighting back, knocks this motherfucker out, knocked his ass out. Boom. Like it, I mean, like we're talking like Hiram Maxim levels of ass kicking here. And and like they got arrested. That they who hired you? Why are you attacking Gaston? I was hired by Henri. I don't know that real guy's real name. And the guy in Belgium who and they arrested. They all these people went to jail. And the legend of Gaston Glock. Don't cross that man. Don't cross him. And he didn't even have a gun to defend himself. He defended himself with his fists. It's yeah, well, I mean, he was in France. He's not allowed to carry guns. So, and I think at the time, you're probably not allowed to carry a 9mm in France because it's a military. I think this happened in France. So, but anyway, but yeah, he was an interesting guy. I mean, he's apparently a very private person, and I'm certainly not unfamiliar with. Yeah, I mean, but like he so he married a new woman much younger than him. I think she's older than me. Pretty blonde woman, and she's into horses. And so maybe he was into horses initially too. Maybe that's how he met her, to be fair. But so they started it's a business and it's called the Glock Stables. And it's like horse stables and they're real fancy, they're real nice, and literally the word name Glock is like on the roof, and they have championship horses and they breed horse and like it's big money. And they even have a fleet of I don't remember what kind. I've seen we posted a picture one years ago, a fleet of company and his private jets, but they're large. They're not as big as Donald Trump's jet, but they're maybe 737 size. They're not 737s. They're European design, but they're jets and they have their Glock written on them. Like he's a very private guy, but they do I'll tell you what, they push that Glock name around. Um, oh shit, I even forgot. I was at working SHOT Show. God, this was 20 years ago. I was working SHOT Show, and a guy that I knew who was a Glock dealer, and he was a West Point grad. He was like, "Holy shit, are you in Vegas?" I'm like, "Yeah." Um, so I got invited to go to this. Glock always used to have this fancy party, and so he's like, "Come to that. What are you doing tonight?" I'm like, "I don't know if I'm going back to." He's like, "Come with me to the Glock party," and I'm like, "Okay, sure, why not?" And we go there, and this thing is like, I think what's the bagpipe? What's the police bagpipe group out of Boston? You know what I'm talking? Or is it from Fife and Drum Corps? Is there, I, yeah, I don't know where they brought these guys in, but it was that. Like they had like Glock carved in ice and like a dais and I mean it was this. I mean it looked like something out of Hollywood, and serving dinner to all these people, and it was like they spend money. My joke is the reason why Gaston Glock can afford to fly around in all these jets is because he puts plastic sights on his pistols. So that's always been. It's like every time you get a pair of plastic sights on your generic civilian Glock, that's a little bit of money that helps pay for that jet.
That
So
was a little more jet fuel.
yep. Or a little more horse semen, I guess. I don't know which one it is. So, but